I'm Harley.
And I'm David.
Welcome to PVM Perspective, a podcast about getting the most out of RuneScape PVM. Today we are going to be talking all about action bars and abilities, but before we get into that, we have some follow-up from our 120 Slayer episode, and I'll hand it over to you, David.
Yeah, so there was a item that we left off the list is to improve your DPS during Slayer that a viewer mentioned to me on PM, and that is Weapon Poison. The one you want to be using is Weapon Poison P++. It's really excellent. The vast majority of Slayer creatures are not immune to poison, and for high-level mobs, where you want to be getting kills as quickly as possible in order to avoid special attacks, or even if you're having some trouble at lower level stuff or even mid-level stuff like Dark Beast, it could really improve your kills per hour and is definitely well worth using. Even though it seems like it costs quite a bit per dose, the amount of little bit of a boost you get is, in my opinion, definitely worth it. And especially at a place like Ripper Demons, just because Ripper Demons drop Weapon Poison as one of their most common drops anyways, you don't end up spending anything at all.
Oh, that's cool. I never would have thought about that either, because I haven't used Weapon Poison since since I came back to RuneScape and I discovered the TDS no longer existed. So yeah, I haven't used it since it became just a whatever overload type thing that you apply every once in a while. So that's...
Yeah, it just lasts for... The Weapon Poison P++ lasts for 10 minutes dose if you use flasks, and it's really excellent. It's really good at a few bosses like AOD and Telos as well.
Cool. Awesome. So go ahead and check that out if you want even more DPS. I'll probably use that, I would say Wyverns especially. Anything that I have trouble killing quickly enough, I'll probably give that a try to speed it up so I don't have to get screwed over as much by how much damage they do. Anyways, now we will go ahead and hop right into the show. The first thing we're going to talk about is action bars specifically. What we have as the first order here is Keybinds. I guess the first point I will make here is if you don't have multiple action bars on your screen, you should really consider putting them on the screen. I think at least 2 can be useful. Many people use more. I have 4 on my screen, although I really only use 2 often during PVM, but I'm not at a point yet where I'm doing a lot of switches. What about you, David?
Yeah, I have 4 that I use pretty consistently. 3 out of the 4 I'm using almost constantly, and then the 4th one I've started to use pretty often too, just as a way of helping with switches. Currently, my 4th action bar is kind of just a reminder or a cue for myself for Phase 5 Telos rotation, but I've got that down to a point where I don't really need that anymore, and we'll probably be converting that almost entirely just to help with weapon switching and item switching.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's about my 3rd and 4th bar kind of work the same way yours do, except not for Telos, but just Boston in general. Like, I have defensive abilities on one, and I think I have switches on another, but I'm still trying to actually do that stuff, so it's kind of there as like a, hey, you should really be doing this, even though most of the time I boss, I have not yet gotten to the point where it's a consistent part of my rotation to use them. I guess the other thing we will talk about a little bit here as well is specific keybinds that we have set up on our action bars. Of course, when you get RuneScape by default, it is set up with the number keys, so 1 through the plus sign are all bound as your actions. Even if you're not going to get super serious about PVM, even if you're just doing Slayer casually, you should really consider changing that. It's not a very efficient way to do it, because moving your hand the whole way across one row of the keyboard is not near as quick as it can be to say if you were to split up into multiple rows. So for example, the way I have my action bar set up, my main action bar with my abilities is I use QWER, ASDF, ZXCV for all my abilities. I don't the last 2 I do not have keybound yet. I haven't figured out what keys I want to be on that action bar, so I just leave the last 2 blank on my main action bar. I haven't felt like I've needed them yet either. So I do that primarily because, that lets me put all 4 of my fingers in one row, and then I just have to move straight down to the next row. I know some people do 5 keybinds there. What do you do, David?
Yeah, I do 5, and I do use the numbers as well, although I have that mapped to my mouse. I also use the F keys for switching sometimes as well, although I'm trying to shift more to a method where I use Shift or Alt. Basically, the way I think of my keybinds is I have the same 10 or so letters, so Q through Y, and then A, S, D, F, G. And then I have the number pad on my mouse is set up to the number pad on RS. And then I have an action bar with just Shift keys and an action bar with just Alt keys. So I have Shift Q W E R T Y, Shift A S D F G, and the same thing with Alt Q W E R T Y, etc. And so that's kind of how I do my action bar. I think that a good way to think of it a lot of times is to have 2 primary action bars that you're using for almost everything, and then your tertiary, and I'm not sure what the word is for the 4th one, but your 4th or 5th action bar can be based off Shift keys or Alt keys is the most common way that I see people doing it.
Yeah. So yeah, the way I have my secondary action bar set up is that's the one that I have 1 through the minus on, and then I also have TG and B on that. And the reason I have TG and B set up that way is we're not really going to talk a lot about specific abilities, but the way my setup works is I have my prayer switches on TG and B, because I do not have a Naga or any kind of special mouse, so I have to switch using the keyboard, and that's the way that I found is the easiest to do without having to go too far away from my keybinds. So if you are doing anything that needs prayer switching, I do a lot of racks, so I definitely find a lot of super useful there. I have my Protect from Magic, Protect from Range, and then I also have Soul Split on there, so I can do Soul Split flicking to increase my deeps when I'm alting.
Yeah, I think that's really important to make sure that you have an easy way to do prayer switching, because even at the highest levels of Slayer, that can be extremely helpful. For example, at Ripper Demons, I pray melee, but I soul split flick for my thresholds in order to make sure I never have to eat, because of course every time you eat you're wasting DPS in some way, or you're chewing through Gethic's Restore potions, which can become expensive very fast.
And I will say too, we will have screenshots in the show notes if a lot of this stuff isn't making sense to you, because we are just rattling off a lot of numbers and or letters here. So if you need to just look at a screenshot to see how we have it set up, those will be in the show notes for you. And of course, yeah, I use my numbers and such. Like my numbers have my healing stuff like Sharks and Cerebrus, and then I have like Freedom Anticipate and Surge on there. That's basically what I use like 1 through 6 for, so that I have a, like I said, my setup right now is primarily Rax focused, but of course that works anywhere else too, where I need to be able to surge like it Vindicta crap like that. But yeah, anything else that you? Oh, I do want to say too. We are talking about this. A lot of people out there who haven't set up their own action bars may be like, "Whoa, I use WASD to look around." I would say that's something. It took me a long time to get here, but I think that's something that's completely worth changing in RuneScape, is the fact that you use WASD to look around. We play a game that doesn't require WASD to move, so it's kind of a waste to have it be looked. So what I have done is switched to have my middle mouse wheel be how I look around, and therefore it took me, I think, probably 2 weeks to get used to that. But I don't even think about it anymore, and I made that change I think at the beginning of this year, so it hasn't even been that long. So it might sound daunting at first, and you will get annoyed in like the first week or so, but the amount of DPS increase / how much easier PVM will become if you do a good keybind setup like we use, it's completely worth it. And in my opinion, I think it's a waste of the WASD keys to use them to look in RuneScape.
Yeah, and I would say that people rest their hands in different places. So there are a lot of really, top flight PVMers who have 1 through 6 or 1 through 5 or 1 through 4 as their basic abilities, and then do their setup is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the QWERTY keys, and then ASDF for other things. Really, wherever your hands are comfortable resting for the type of keyboard you have should be the basis for all of your keybinds. You don't necessarily have to use the same ones we do. It's just important that you you figure out what you want to do so that you can become more consistent. Because once your keybinds become automatic, then you could focus on things like adding switches, and that requires a lot less effort once you've got the basics pretty nailed down.
Yeah, you definitely don't have to do it exactly like we do. The only thing I would say that you should definitely do is split it up into multiple rows. Don't have all your keybinds for your primary action bar on the same row, because it's so hard to move down, from 1 to the equals sign to move down that row. That's the only thing that is going to really slow you down. So make sure that you split it up. I'd say split up into 3 rows. You will thank yourself once you've learned that, because it's so much more natural just to move your hand straight down instead of halfway across your keyboard to cast things. Anyways,
yeah, absolutely.
Do you have anything else to say on action bars and keybinds?
I'm not sure exactly. I would say that you should definitely, when you do end up making a switch, definitely practice. It might seem boring, but practicing DPS rotations, especially with a new keybind on a dummy, is really, really helpful, either in your house or in Lumbridge. I used to do it all the time anytime I have a new switch or something, I'll spend 10, 15 minutes practicing on a dummy until I can do it pretty easily, and then I'll take it into a boss after practicing.
Yeah, I mean, you can also do Slayer or an easy boss. I think I taught myself my keybinds at God Wars 1, if I remember correctly, because I didn't feel like doing a dummy, so I just went to like Grado or something and learned them there. But yeah, don't switch up your keybinds and then go to Telos or AOD or Rax, because it will be a nightmare. But go do some easier stuff. A dummy is definitely a good place to start. But even after that, I'm pretty sure, like I said, I went to God Wars 1, and then I went back to QBD, and then I eventually started going back to Rax once I felt comfortable again with everything. And
yeah.
We will move on to the next bit here just to talk about hardware. So there are a few different hardware things you can get that can greatly improve the ease of combat in RuneScape, or any MMO really that has a ton of abilities. And the first one is the Razer Naga, or really any mouse with buttons. I know Logitech makes one. There's also some cheap off-brand models I know on Amazon. So if you can't afford something expensive, just if you want a way to make things just considerably easier, get a mouse with buttons. Even if you get a mouse with 3 buttons and you just move all your prayer switches to it, it will make your combat so much easier for a lot of high-level bossing, not having to think about prayer switching in the same hand that you are doing all your abilities. Of course, if you can afford a Naga, I think that's probably the way to go, as long as you're on Windows. Don't buy it on the Mac, because the Mac driver support is atrocious, and it will literally cause your computer to kernel panic, because Razer does not know how to develop drivers for OS X. But that's a different story. I think you used the Naga, right, David?
Yeah, I used the Naga, and I never installed anything for it. I just plugged it in and started playing immediately. I never downloaded anything. I've never signed into Razer Synapse. I've never account with Razer. I just use it, and it just works. Of course, I'm using Windows 10, so not a Mac thing.
Yeah.
I really like it. Even if the only thing you use it for at first is prayer flicking, that alone just makes a gigantic difference.
Yeah, and like I said, there are mouses with fewer buttons. Like the Naga has 12 buttons, I think. So if you feel like you need something else to that, you can always buy a 4-mouse button or something. Like I said,
even that, just pray mage, pray melee, pray range, and soul split. Really, there's no boss where you need prayer flux typically. And so even if that's the only thing you have keybound, it still will be worth it. I think there's good things about having a Naga, because I can make use of all 12 buttons that I have here, and they're really easy for me to use, but they're really not necessary.
Yeah, I've always felt like the Naga was slightly too many buttons. I don't know, the last row or two are kind of hard to reach comfortably with your hand. I don't know, must be personally a fan of 6 bigger, more spaced out buttons that would, but that's, some people like it, so it's there for them.
Yeah, the 10, 11, 12 buttons aren't very good for me. They're pretty uncommon to use. I usually just use 1 through 9 for stuff.
And so the other option we have as well, which I think you can technically pair this with the Naga if you wanted to, but it's kind of meant as kind of a mouse replacement, is the Razer Orbweaver, which this is a control that you kind of sits in the palm of your hand, kind of, and it's a really big device, probably about 3-4 inches long, 2-3 inches wide, and it has, I think, 14 or 16 keys on it, and it has, to the right of it, it has a little nub that you use as the mouse. Instead of like moving this actual physical mouse around, you just have a little nub that you put your thumb on and use it to move, while you have your other 4 fingers on the function keys. This is something that a lot of people find super useful. This is, of course, very non-traditional to normal inputs in a computer, but what it can do, I mean, especially if you have something like RSI or anything like that, you find a mouse uncomfortable for any reason, this can first of all, it can save your wrists, and second of all, it can just be a more comfortable way to play. There's definitely a little bit of a learning curve to this. I would say more than like a Naga or like a multi-button mouse, but there are a lot of people who find it super rewarding. This is something that I want to get eventually, but I do not currently have, either of these, because I am I'm broke as hell. I was trying not to swear there, so I had to change my statement. But yeah, if you can afford anything like either of these, I would say look into it. I believe Mage used an Orbweaver for a long time. I think his current one is broken, but he liked it from what I remember. So check out videos on that if you'd like to as well.
Yeah, and the last thing that I'll say that some people have started using, especially a lot of my friends who do high-level PVM, is a foot pedal. So they'll have a foot pedal for shift or for alt, usually just one, but sometimes two. And then instead of having it, just is an ease of use thing. If you have enough money to blow on something like that, not blow, but if you have enough money to spend on something like that, then you could just hit your foot pedal instead of having to worry about hitting shift F. You just hit your foot pedal down and hit F, and then there's your barricade or whatever it is you have keybound for that.
Yeah, that's cool. That would also be another good way to if you had even a Naga, but I don't know, this is why I think a 6-button mouse or something would be perfect for me, because I could make one of them shift and then just use my mouse, and that would definitely, if you had a way, I never even thought about that before, but if you had a way to activate shift and alt on a separate device, that would definitely be super useful. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the cost of a foot pedal is, but I know they're getting more and more popular. People I've talked to.
Yeah. All right. We will move on here. I do want to say too, as far as David's setup goes as well, he's going to have a screenshot in the show notes showing Trio Vorago Switchscape setup, which we'll be talking a lot later about switches. But if you want to see what a ridiculous but still not complete Switchscape setup looks like, you can check out that screenshot as well.
Yeah, and for melee, Switchscape is much, much more intense, but I actually do no longer possess some of the weapons I used to use for my melee Switchscape. If you look at the Angel of Death video that you got lit up, released, he kind of has the setup that I used to use, which is ZGS, a Scythe, 4 Drygores, a Shield, a Defender, and a spec weapon, which is the Stadius Warhammer.
So gambling doesn't pay. That's
if you count up, that's something like 10 or 11 different weapons that he is using, and I used to do that too, but I no longer have most of those. So that's okay.
Well, maybe it's okay. Don't go to the duel arena, kids. That's the moral of the story.
Yeah, don't do that.
Anyways, let's go ahead and move on to the next part we have here, and that is abilities. To get it started off here, we're just going to mention 2 sources that are great for learning action bars. The first one is, and both of these sources, by the way, is at least where I get a lot of my information from, so most of the stuff I'm going to be talking about here definitely comes from the people who make these videos. So the first example is Junesongs on YouTube. He makes fantastic guides for a lot of stuff. He makes a lot of boss guides, but his best stuff is his DPS for dummies, or just his specific breakdown of items and such. But he has a lot of guides that you can go there and you can watch the whole thing, but he goes into super in depth. What I did at first was I just went there and literally just copied the action bar that he was talking about. Didn't really pay attention to the rest of the stuff like canceling abilities early and things like that, because it's a bit wetty for me still. But if that's something you want to do, it's totally worth learning eventually. I just haven't gotten there yet. And the other one is Evil Lucario, who I haven't watched any of their videos yet, but I know you're a big fan, David.
Yeah, I think their videos are really good. They don't have a mic, they don't ever speak, but I think the breakdown they do is really excellent. So you have to actually watch the video because they basically type everything up on the screen and kind of have arrows indicating what they're doing. But if you're interested in some of the techniques that either higher level PVMers or more advanced players are using, things like auto attack, using auto attacks to their fullest extent, weapon switching, invention, switching, or weapon switching due to invention, weapon switching due to ability combinations, how to cancel abilities effectively, how to do a good rotation in specific instances, not just generally, then those videos are really fantastic, I think, and will help you pretty tremendously. There's a pretty significant amount of DPS that most players are not taking advantage of simply because they're not using ability combinations effectively or auto attacks effectively, or they think that using an auto attack is always bad, etc. So definitely would check those out if you're interested. But we'll be covering a lot during parts of the show as well.
So basically, they're making videos like it's unregistered Hypercam 2 days still, the way it sounds.
No, not necessarily, but they're just. I mean, not necessarily. Just basically just pretty modern video with modern graphics and everything. Just no voice.
I know. I'm just saying that's a thing from a bygone era of the unregistered Hypercam 2 days. That's all.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
I don't mind too much just having to read though. It's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your own personal likes and dislikes there. But yeah, I imagine I'll be watching them at some point. I'm definitely a fan of people who talk more than do text, but some people like that. And yeah, it's good to have a diverse amount of options. For the next parts here, I'm just kind of gonna hand over the show to you and let you take the reins, because I imagine this is this is the part where you shine the most. So go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff is covered in those videos, but just to reiterate and present it in perhaps a different form, is the most important way to improve your DPS is the prioritization of abilities. Oftentimes, people will make the mistake of prioritizing abilities with a low cooldown, things like rack, piercing shot, slice, etc. Those are really not good abilities to be using in almost any circumstance unless your target is stunned, and provide a really small amount of DPS relative to others. What instead you should be doing, whether you use Revolution or full manual, is prioritizing higher damage dealing abilities and putting them in such a way that maximizes the amount of abilities you do that are high damage dealing. So, for example, in a magic rotation, you might want to use Dragon Breath first, but if you only use high damage abilities, say Dragon Breath, and then both of your bleeds, and then Tuskas, and then Sonic, what ends up happening is that you don't have any of those good abilities back on cooldown, which is why DPS rotations are built the way they are. And so I think that different things work for different people. There is a sort of tried and true and proven setup of abilities that will always yield the best possible damage, but combinations and situations can cause variance. So basically, what you should try to do is have 4 to 5 basics that you're trying to prioritize at all times, and then figure out ways in which you can make sure that you're never using more than just those 4 or 5 basics. So the second is thing that I was going to talk about is Revolution specifically, especially in Slayer. Sometimes you want to AFK, sometimes you want to do more damage. For AFK abilities setups, almost certainly you're going to be using Magic, because Magic is just because of the different abilities it has for AoEs, it's more or less the best in the game because Dragon Breath is such a powerful ability and has a low cooldown relative to some of the others of its type, and
Plus, you've
also
got
is an AoE.
ancients that make everything AOE or whatever it
Yeah,
does, blood barrage and whatnot.
well, it makes all auto attacks
Oh,
AoEs.
okay, that's what
If
it
you have
is.
Blood Barrage set up, it makes auto attacks. It doesn't make all. It'd be a little wild if using Blood Barrage made Wild Magic AoE or something. But no, it definitely is a much better setup if you want to AFK because you could prioritize Dragon Breath, Corruption Blast, and Chain, and have those three abilities go off first. After that, Tuska's Wrath is great for Slayer. If you're not on a Slayer assignment, then probably use Sonic Wave and Combust. Since you're not going to be paying too much attention, as my guess, I wouldn't really bother too much with stun combinations. And so that's kind of how I would set up my action bar. If I wanted to prioritize damage, then you definitely want to set up your action bar in a way that prioritizes all of your highest dealing abilities. One way that I've seen that's pretty common for people who are a little scared of having a lot of keybinds is to set up their action bar in a way that only keybinds certain basic abilities. So you might have only Dragon Breath and your Bleed abilities keybound, or if you do a lot of Telos, maybe you'll have your stuns keybound as well, and then you'll have all your other basic abilities just go off in order with Revolution. So then when you want to use a Bleed or you want to use Dragon Breath, you could just worry about those, and then everything else can be done by Revolution. And so that's one way of making the jump from Revolution to full manual is to slowly add more and more keybinds, maybe one or two basic abilities at a time. And some of the best PVMers in the game actually use this method. There's one friend of mine who just hit 1200 in rage at Telos, and he uses Revolution at Telos. He's duoed Vorago with Telos, done 4-man hard mode, or not with Telos, with Revolution, done 4-man hard mode with Revolution, AOD with Revolution. So Revolution should not be something that uh, that feels like a barrier to high level PVM because it is possible. Although there's so much more freedom with full manual that I would definitely recommend transitioning to it as best as you can.
Yeah, and I would say too, be careful how you do that, because one thing you don't want to do is have to make too many changes. So make sure that if you're gonna slowly add abilities, that you don't make keybinds that you later want to change. Like, it's best to make like one drastic change and have all your keybinds in mind instead of having what keybind you learn and then moving it one to the right or to the left because you changed your mind. So try to get that, at least what your keybinds are going to be, set in stone, even if you're not going to be using them all right away. Not having to change them again, because that just really shakes up the game if you have to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and so the basically full manual, you have a huge amount of freedom, which is why it ends up being really good to do that. And you could kind of have your action bar set up however you like. So I like to still have all my best damage dealing abilities in the front. One suggestion that people have is to always have abilities of a similar type be in the same position on your action bar. So, for example, if you have Corruption Blast on your Magic action bar, your Corruption Shot ability should be the exact same keybind. If you have a Sonic Wave, then Dazing Shot should be the same keybind, or Piercing Shot, or not Piercing Shot, Needle Strike, that Wild Magic and Snapshot and Hurricane should all take the same slot, etc. And so basically by doing that, you're really helping a lot on the number of keybinds you have to learn, because while there are differences, in general, especially Magic and range, but even melee to some extent if you're not doing try-hard methods, but just doing one weapon, they all end up being very similar in terms of how the abilities are set up. And so having them in the same spot on your action bar can help you really cut down on how much learning you have to do. Okay, so the next thing is weapon switches. I currently don't really use my action bar for weapon switches, so I'm trying to slowly shift towards that. Currently, I just click on them in my inventory, and so basically there's two different types of weapon switches. There's weapon switching for Invention Perks, and there's weapon switching based on maximizing damage. So if you notice, there are different abilities of what seem like the same type. So for example, Sonic Wave and Concentrated Blast, Cleave and Decimate, Needle Strike and Dazing Shot. These two seem to occupy the same position in ability rotations and are quite excellent and only have a relatively short cooldown. But the thing is that they don't share cooldowns with each other. So a way to really improve your DPS massively, and this is most clear with melee because Decimate and Cleave are simply better than the magic and ranged alternatives, and also because Berserk, because it's shorter amount of time, getting as many high damage dealing abilities as you possibly can within that short Zerk rotation makes a much bigger difference than a Sunshine rotation or a Death Swiftness rotation, is you can switch abilities to maximize your basics. So what I mean by this is that you may be doing, say, melee at Araxor. So your first ability might be Cleave with your Scythe, and after that you might do something like Dismember or Sever. What I do, though, is I switch immediately to Drygores, use Decimate, and then use the other two abilities, and then have Fury. So basically, while I'm doing melee, and of course I cancel Fury after 2 hits to make sure it stays within a single global cooldown, and I'm not wasting DPS by using the extra hit of Fury. Essentially, when I'm at Araxor, because I'm switching back and forth between Drygores and a Scythe, I'm only using the 5 best possible basics, which really improves my damage a lot. If I'm doing Vorago or something and I want to do a method like this, I might switch to a wand and an offhand in order to use Concentrated Blast and then switch back to my staff for the rest of my rotation. This kind of is a lot of effort, but it's really good. It's really worth doing for melee, and I would definitely suggest learning it, especially if you want to improve kill times at Araxor or AOD or other places where melee is good. And it's also really good if you own a Saren Godbow, because Needle Strike is so phenomenally powerful in comparison to the alternative for dual wield or for two-handed, that a lot of people will use their Saren Godbow but bring Ascensions as a switch just for the use of Needle Strike. So Harley, I don't know if you have thoughts on this form of weapon switching, but that's kind of the first type, the old school version of weapon. Well, not old school like the game old school, because it's still EOC, but the pre-invention weapon switching.
Yeah, this is something that, I mean, I haven't done yet because it's, like you said, it's a ton of effort, but it is super interesting to me, the amount of payoff that it has. I suppose maybe someday, once I have, once we have macros in the game and maybe I have a Razer Naga, I will incorporate things like this. But yeah, it is fascinating to learn about for sure.
Yeah, and I don't actually have any of these switches keybound. I just have trained myself to switch extremely fast. Well, it's just a lot of practice. But it can definitely shave a ton of time off of kills. It's extremely noticeable, especially if you're meleeing Vorago. It could be the difference of several thousand damage per second, maybe 5,000 damage per second at the very least, because of how much better some of these abilities are. Additionally, even though the abilities Destroy and Hurricane share a cooldown, Destroy is obviously much more damage than Hurricane, but sometimes you want a quick burst of DPS or you want to use AoEs. So for example, at AoD, if I'm melee basing, I'll normally Destroy if minions are not out, but if minions are out, then I'll switch to a Scythe and use Hurricane because AoEs. If I'm at Araxor, and of course the special attacks happen every so often, and so if I have either Destroy or Hurricane up in my rotation and Berserk only has a few seconds left, if I know that Araxor could either web or cocoon, and if it's high enough rage that I can't just ignore the cleave, then even though Destroy is better DPS, I might switch to a Scythe and Hurricane so I could get in a threshold inside my Zerg before the next Araxor special comes. That kind of requires you to have enough knowledge of the boss that you know exactly what specials are going to happen at what times. But once you have that knowledge, it can really be a huge benefit to DPS, because it can be kind of frustrating to waste 7 or 8 seconds of your Berserk, or have to cancel Destroy after just one ability because of Araxor webs, whereas you could get almost as much damage with a Hurricane.
Yeah, that whole timing in bosses and knowing when to use abilities and when to not is definitely hard to master. It's something I still suck at. I cancel stuff all the time at Rax because she surprises me with a web.
Yeah, and eventually as you become better and better at PVM, your mind stops thinking about time in terms of 1 second intervals, and instead will start thinking about time in terms of 0.4 second intervals. And so the game tick system will no longer seem off because it'll seem natural, and a second will seem unnatural once you get into a real PVM mindset. If it's kind of hard to explain unless you've actually bossed enough to know what I'm saying, but eventually your mind will literally start to think of time in terms of 0.4 seconds.
No, I understand. I understand what you mean. How that could happen. I don't think I've gone that far in RuneScape, but I've spent. I mean, like Overwatch is a game that I've put enough time into. I mean, that game, it doesn't have a tick system like this one, but I feel like I measure the game in a much different way than the people who are new or even like at a mid level with that game do.
Yeah, for sure, and all of that is really will help more than you might think. So the other type of switching, and this is the much more popular and common one, and probably the easier one, is switching based on perks. The best one is Planted Feet. There was a lot of controversy about this on release because it was technically bugged, but JMods pretty quickly realized that the quote-unquote bug was actually the way it should and ought to work, and so they ended up changing things in order to make it work that way. And then they basically nerfed Melee for Planted Feet and made Planted Feet not work with Melee, just because Melee had become so much more powerful than Magic and range that it was kind of bad for the game. And now it's still probably better than Magic and range for most things in terms of just dealing pure DPS, but it's not as absurd as it was when Planted Feet worked with it. Anyways, basically the way Planted Feet works is you switch to a weapon that has the Planted Feet perk on it, which of course you can get from 5 Psyware components. Or two Psyware components. That's a guaranteed Planted Feet. You only need 2. Most people have Planted Feet combined with Aftershock 1. This is not a 100% guarantee and can be expensive. I've probably spent maybe 150 mil, maybe 200 mil, I'm not really sure, trying to get Planted Feet Aftershock 1 combos. And that's with 2 Kaiware components and 3 Ilijankan components. That's the Saren and Zeros components from God Wars Dungeon 2. And essentially it just increases the duration of your Sunshine or your Death Swiftness in exchange for losing the bleed. Essentially, you give up a few thousand damage over the course of a Sunshine or Death Swiftness. In exchange, you can get up to 2, sometimes even 3 extra thresholds inside of your Sunshine or Death Swiftness. With Planted Feet, without Planted Feet in a Sunshine, you could usually, typically, if you're really good, you'll get 2 Wild Magics and a Sphinx, a Deep Impact, and a Tendril, maybe a second Deep Impact if you're really lucky. Inside of Planted Feet, you could get 2 Wild Magics, 2 Asphyxes, 2 Deep Impacts, and a Tendril. And for a lot of people, that Tendril and Deep Impact is sometimes being replaced by Gothic Staff spec. Although that also depends on procs of Impatient or Ring procs, etc. But anyways, that can help a lot. Combined with the Vigor, Planted Feet plus switching to Vigor is just really is a massive improvement on your DPS at any boss. Or even with Slayer, it helps quite a bit to and it's very little effort. You just click on whatever your Planted Feet switch is, use your ultimate, and then click back to your normal weapon. If you don't do a lot of Vorago or Telos, you don't really need the Planted Feet Aftershock 1 instead, I'd recommend getting a Sun Spear because it works for both magic and ranged. And you could just simply make an Aftershock 1 gizmo on its own, which is, of course, super common to get. So then you have Planted Feet as one of your two perks on the gizmo, and Aftershock 1 is the other one. The reason for the Aftershock thing, of course, is you don't want to lose your Aftershock stacks due to a weapon switch. It's just very unnecessary DPS loss. So yeah, Harley, have you had a chance to use Planted Feet yet, or are you still working on
No, I haven't. I haven't incorporated switches very much at all. The only time switches I try to do is not even ones with perks, but just ones for defensive abilities, like switch to a shield bow or just a shield in general, so that I can reflect I can't even think of the name of all the abilities, but use them to heal myself up or block like a web that I messed up and, used an alt on Rax and then she webbed, and to save myself some health, I will try to switch to block that. But yeah, I haven't gone anywhere close to switching items with Invention Perks yet.
Gotcha. Well, if I were going to suggest one weapon switch to really to purchase and master, it would definitely be Planted Feet, because anytime using magic or ranged, it's a really massive boost to your damage for a pretty low amount of effort. Just one extra click before you use an ultimate. The next invention switch that's gaining more and more popularity, especially given how incredibly good it is at AOD, is flanking. Flanking's a little harder to get. You get it from 5 clockwork components. You could get that from disassembling cannon parts, which you buy from the dwarf that you reclaim your cannon at near the entrance to the Dwarving Mining Guild. I guess that'd be just northeast of the Fowler Lodestone, near, I forget whether it's White Wolf Mountain or Ice Mountain, one or two. But I think people can get the picture. Anyways, it's kind of fairly common to get, sometimes rare. It really depends on your RNG. I would definitely get 120 Invention before going for Flanking 3. You could expect it to run maybe 25 to 30 mil per perk with an average number of temps, although it could be much more or much less depending on your RNG. It essentially improves on the damage of impact or deep impact anytime you are not directly facing your target. Jagex seems to be extremely lenient with what directly facing your target is. So, for example, at Vorago, simply being on the far right side of him but still facing him still counts as not being directly in front of your target. So if you position yourself correctly, even on the final phase where you're literally facing Vorago the entire time, flanking still works. It works almost all the time at Nex. It works on the pillars during Zaro's phase at Nex. Really, it kind of works all over the place. There's even ways to make flanking work at Telos, although I haven't started using those yet. I probably should, but just haven't gotten around to it. And essentially, it makes your stun abilities, your basic stun abilities, hit 220% weapon damage. And to put that in perspective, that's better than any other basic that you possibly could do. So anytime your target is faced away from you, impact, the basic, becomes better than deep impact, the threshold. And instead of losing adrenaline, you gain adrenaline. Deep impact also gains a massive boost. And it becomes so good that deep impact and the tight bindings is, I believe, the ranged equivalent. And then the melee equivalent is forceful backhand, or I think it's called stomp is the other one. Those abilities become as good as something like Wild Magic or Hurricane. So combined with Planted Feet, if you're at, say, Vorago and you get lucky with your impact procs, or you're on phase 2 or phase 4 and facing behind him, imagine being able to do 4 Wild Magics inside of a Sunshine, and that's the advantage of deep impact. Of course, you need another weapon for this. Most common way to do it is to put it on a tier 90 weapon. You put your Flanking 3 and Aftershock 3 perks on a tier 90, and then you of course use your tier 92 weapon as your main weapon. Another way to do it, I guess, would be to just put it on if you can't quite afford tier 92s, what I did was I staff as my main, and then I use the wilderness weapons, those tier 87 ones from, what was that mini game called? That nobody, Bounty Hunter, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Bounty Hunter tier 87 weapons, and the ranged one is actually a charge bow, so you don't have to worry about an ammo switch, which is super nice. And so I just put Flanking 3 and Aftershock 3 on those tier 87 weapons. Of course, flanking is rare enough that it might actually be worth destroying the weapons in order to get your perks back rather than destroy the perks to get the weapons back. But that's up to you, depending on how RNG based you want it to get. For melee, the way to do it is to just use an extra offhand Drygore. So you just have your offhand Drygore longsword as your main weapon that you're using, and then get either a rapier or a offhand mace for your other one. The reason why nobody uses two tier 92s, unless you're using magic, then sometimes people put flanking on a tier 92 orb and just switch to a wand and orb and combine this switch with the concentrated blast switch, which I think is actually ideal. Definitely what you should be doing if you could afford both tier 92 wand and tier 92 staff. Is because there's currently a glitch where if you die with two of the exact same item augmented, there's a chance you'll lose one of them. Several Staff of Sliskeys were lost when the flanking came out due to this bug, which really would be a little bit unfortunate to lose a 2.6 bill item to a bug, and really there's nothing you could do. Same thing if you have two knock staffs or whatever. One alternative is to just simply die one of the weapons, but if you don't have the money to just die a weapon, then just use a tier 90 and that's good enough.
It's a bit ridiculous if they still haven't fixed that bug. It's like one of the worst in the game in a long time. Like to delete that much money. I mean, whether you have tier 90 or tier 92, because people who have tier 90s, it's still a lot of money to them. I would be so demotivated from playing if something like that happened to me.
Yeah, and if your main weapon is below tier 90, I would strongly recommend working towards getting a tier 90 rather than adding a perk like flanking. It's just much better overall to improve the tier of your weapon. But if you do have a tier 90 weapon, can't afford a tier 92 but can afford flanking, then by all means tier 87, or if you could get a good price on the tier 88 Ancient Warriors weapons, then that's also a really great option. And also, probably better than tier 87.
So you think the God Wars 2 items are a pretty good option too?
They're okay. So when I was using this on my Ascension, before I realized that the tier 87 bow, I was using a offhand Shadow Glaive as my flanking switch. But once I realized tier 87 weapon was a charge bow, I started using that. They're very similar. They're very, very similar. The reason I would pick the tier 87 one is because really the whole point of this is just to get like a big hit of damage in. So for example, Deep Impact will hit 10k, same thing with Tight Bindings. And so I'd rather have the tier 87 damage with still tier 87 accuracy than the tier 90 accuracy but only tier 80 damage. So yeah, the God Wars Ascension 2 weapons are also a solid option. I would just recommend tier 90s if you're getting flanking, it usually means that you've got pretty much everything else covered, if that makes sense. And so you might as well get the best if you're going to do that. Would be my thoughts on that. And if you can't afford the tier 87 weapons or an extra tier 90 weapon, then you probably should be focusing on spending your money elsewhere. It'd be my guess. So the last invention perk, there's two more actually. The next invention perk people switch to is lunging. Lunging is typically only used for melee. It doubles the damage of a bleed in exchange for the bleed not increasing damage as the target moves. The reason this is only good for melee, obviously, is actually it's 1.5 times damage, sorry, not double damage. The reason this is only good for melee is because it's more efficient to use the magic or range bleeds and walk them, so they'd be combust and what's the magic one? What's the range one, Harley? A frag shot, yeah,
Yeah.
fragmentation shot. It's better to use those and walk your target. And for melee, since Dismember, which is the one lunging works for, does not improve damage based on walking your target, it's actually quite good. So a common setup for melee, I wouldn't recommend this necessarily to Rax, so it's not really necessary, but if you're trying to go for AoD speed kills or Vorago speed kills or something like that, one thing that people will often do is they'll have their main hand Dryger with Aftershock 3, an offhand Dryger with Precise 5, an offhand Dryger with Flanking 3, and an offhand Dryger with Dismember. Drygors are awesome for this because you could have 3 different types of Drygors, which both makes it easier to remember. The way I do it is I have Flanking 3 on my offhand Drygor Mace because for some reason stunning and crushing seem related to me, and then I have my bleed on my I have my lunging on my rapier because rapier's lunge. I don't know, that's just easy for me to remember or whatever. And then I have my offhand Drygor longsword as my main with Precise 5. Obviously, you don't have to do that, but rapier's lunge and mace's crush just kind of really hits home for me as something that makes it easier to remember which Drygor I should be using for which ability. So all that stuff is pretty try hard. Although if you do a lot of Vorago or a lot of AoD, then flanking is really awesome to get, and I would definitely recommend prioritizing it at least more than you normally would.
Awesome.
The last one, and this one is for Slayer, is Caraming. The Caraming perk makes it so that the 2 multi-target ability, so that Chain and Ricochet both hit an additional targets per rank, so you're going to want to get the one that hits 3 more targets per rank. If you're planning on AFKing Slayer almost entirely, and you have a little bit of extra money, then I would highly recommend either getting a tier 90 staff, definitely Nox staff if you can afford it. If you can't afford a Nox staff, you could go with the tier 87 staff. I believe it's called Obliteration, but don't quote me on that. From Wilderness, and put Aftershock 3 Caraming on it, because there have been some pretty extensive DPS studies at Dark Beasts, Abyssal Demons, those 2 places in particular, that Caraming is actually better to put on your weapon than Precise 5, assuming that you're just doing kind of an AFK method where you sunshine every minute or so, but don't really look at your screen beyond that. So if you're planning on doing the Abyssal Demons and Dark Beasts all the way to 120 Slayer route, which I know is definitely a popular way to do it, then getting a Nox staff just for Slayer and putting Caraming on it can definitely be worthwhile. For me, I don't do that because I tend to use melee at those places, because I prefer to pay attention with Slayer, and when I'm not paying attention with Slayer, I'm really not too bothered. I'm not bothered enough to get a whole extra weapon, but definitely is something that you can consider. You could also do it as a switch, but I think that kind of defeats the purpose of doing an AFK Slayer method if you're switching weapons for a basic ability. And yeah, so that's kind of Invention perk related weapon switches.
Tip for Mage Bit, training Slayer, because we all know Mage is gonna do the AFK way. So there you go, bud.
Yeah, exactly. Really, I'm not sure, Harley, if you could think of one. I was actually trying Black Demons earlier. It seemed like Black Demons do way more damage now than they used to and have way higher life points. It seems like
a year to a year and a half ago, they buffed all demons in the game, and Black Demons are definitely nastier than they were.
Except Abyssal Demons, though, right? Like, Abyssal Demons are still... Abyssal Demons, you cut through, like, a hot knife through butter compared to Black Demons.
I think they classify them slightly differently, and that's probably why, but yeah, you are right.
Well, I know lore-wise, there's 2 different types of demons. I know that Abyssal Demons are from the other type lore-wise.
Yeah, okay, so they buff like greater, lesser Black Demons.
Yeah, okay.
Whatever. That I can
Yeah, so I was doing a Black Demons task, and just because I thought I might as well try it since I had it, and I'm trying to figure out which task to block now that I have an extra space open for blocking a task. And Black Demons were pretty awful. I was getting maybe half as much Slayer XP as Abyssal Demons. I actually had to eat food. I couldn't really AFK with the exact same setup. Obviously, I could just bring better armor, or use Amulet of Souls instead of Amulet of Zealots or whatever. But using an identical setup to my Abyssal Demon setup, and the Abyssal Demon setup, I could AFK as long as I click every few minutes for prayer potions or whatever. Uh, I could literally AFK almost infinitely there. And Black Demons, I couldn't do that at all and was getting half as much XP. So I think Black Demons are really maybe what Abyssal Demons might be turned into, or Dark Beasts might be turned into once they become buffed. And if that happens, then the days of click and make a sandwich are over for Slayer. Fortunately or unfortunately.
Well, at least at higher XP levels. I mean, it'll still be there. It just won't be. They won't be as much XP, or as AFK. But I mean, Black Demons are still kind of AFK. I mean, it's not like they're
but not nearly. Sure, but Black Demons versus, I would say Black Demons versus Abyssal Demons, assuming you're using an Ectoplasmator, is the difference between AFKing, like, say, Magic trees and AFKing harps. I think the difference is that drastic. Like I've in the past taken a 5-minute shower by using the Ectoplasmator at Abyssal Demons, clicking an aggression potion, taking a shower, and then coming back. Black Demons, you have to alt tab every 20 to 20 seconds at most, or you can end up dying with the exact same gear. And it's less than half as much XP as Abyssal Demons.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an argument to be made that Abyssal Demons and Dark Beasts are far too AFK as far as where they go. Because it's basically set it and forget it. Yeah, I would agree. I can't think of any other ones that for that much. I mean, especially for the amount of XP they give out. Right, like if they nerf their XP, then it wouldn't be as big of a problem. But I'd rather have them keep the same XP, or like increase the XP, but also make them harder, so that basically the XP would stay the same, but you would actually have to pay attention. Would be my hopes as to what they would do with them. Yeah,
but again, if you are not the type of person who's super into combat and will keep their comp cape, start doing Slayer every day, because if the current trend of the way that Slayer is being buffed continues, then it's going to be much, much more effort. Even if it's not harder or more time, it'll be significantly more effort to get 120 Slayer than it is today. Because today you could just do Muzzput, Dark Beast, Abyssal Demons, Ganodermics, and that's it. And you'd be fine. You just do those 4 tasks all the way.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think if you want like click every 5 minutes, you should do it today, because I don't think that was intended for Slayer. I mean, maybe some of the newer above 120 tasks will be that way, but I also imagine, like, I mean, I guess there'll still be monsters you'll be able to do that at. It just, you won't get as good XP as you are now. You're getting like 200k an hour, 100k an hour, or something like that. Would be my guess as to what would happen. Some of the tasks that, like, you skip now. I can't think of any because I haven't tested any, but some of those tasks that you can just mow through but aren't worth it XP wise could become the new route for super AFK, which in my opinion is fair, because you're talking about things like harps and crafting. Like, I think that's 50k XP an hour in crafting.
Right. Whereas Abyssal Demons, if you count Slayer and combat XP and Invention XP, is like 2.5 mil XP an hour with everything combined.
Yeah,
or 2 mil XP an hour, whatever it is. The point is, it's a massive amount in comparison to harps. Even if it's 1 mil XP an hour, you're not doing tryhard methods. Whatever it is, it's way more. And there's no, given recent updates, there's definitely no indication, and of course this could change, but there's no indication that Jagex is moving towards a make Slayer more profitable route. It seems to me that the common belief is that Slayer is too profitable as it is now, and.
I mean, they've outright said that they don't think Slayer needs to be more profitable.
Sure, yeah, that's fair. But
I don't know that they want to make it less profitable, but they have said that like there is plenty of profit in Slayer, and like I think any of the new monsters we see will at max make like 7 mil an hour or something like that, like some of the higher level Slayer ones do. But I don't think we'll see.
I mean, 7 mil an hour is pretty phenomenal. So we'll see. I'm doubtful about that. Right
I'm
now,
saying
there's
at
only one
max, and I'm saying it's not going to be every monster.
But yeah,
there are going to be some monsters that are good, that are great money makers, but it's not going to be. It's not going to be like. It's not going to break the 10 mil or 15 mil or whatever bank.
Yeah.
I would say as it probably shouldn't either. I mean, I think Slayer between like 5 to 7 mil topping out is pretty good profit for any skill in the game.
Yeah. Okay, so next we sort of got some more maximizing DPS ideas. So I think.
Well, I would say actually, unless they.
Oh, sure.
As far as Slayer goes, I mean, unless they like, I don't know. To me, something like Living Wyverns, if something like that came out, I think you could make a lot of money. I would be okay if like a monster that's that hard or harder would make like 10 mil an hour, but it would have to be a ridiculously hard monster for it to classify. But I personally, I'd be totally cool with there being such a thing.
Living Wyverns are pretty horrific money, unless you get lucky, I guess, with the crossbow drops. I just scrimshaw sacrifice Living Wyverns.
Yeah, I mean, I hope they make some hard monsters because those monsters are all about XP. I hope they make some hard monsters in the 120 Slayer release that are good money instead of good XP.
Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, that'd be nice, but I'm not seeing it so far, and I really hope that the XP curve doesn't follow the Gemstone Dragon's XP curve, because if that's the new baseline, then 120 Slayer is going to be real annoying to get after the update, at least compared to today.
I mean, I think. Yeah, it's hard to read. I honestly think there's a chance of that, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, I think currently Slayer is in a place where so much of it has not been updated for EOC. Like, I mean, it used to be with Slayer, well, and every skill, the XP
Slayer used
better.
to be the slowest skill.
Yeah.
Slayer used to be the slowest skill by far. It used to be where, prior to some of the newer skills coming out, like it might have been pre-farming, actually. I'm pretty sure that prior to farming, it took longer to get 99 Slayer than every other skill in the game combined, assuming you were doing fastest.
Farming and Slayer came out at around the same time. I think they were within months of each other, from what I remember.
Sure. But farming, obviously, if you count it in terms of amount of time back then, before war bans was actually a really long time. If you count it just in terms of time spent, actually doing farming, it wasn't very much time at all. But the point was Slayer was by far the slowest skill.
Yeah, Slayer used to be like
for years.
50k an hour. You would be ridiculously happy about getting that. And I mean, obviously the times have changed, and I think it should be more XP now. So I'm not suggesting that, but I think part of the problem with Slayer, unlike other skills in the game, is like Slayer is a skill that gets easier with time no matter what. Whereas like woodcutting, where cutting Magiks used to be good XP, and now it's crap XP because there's not armor to augment how quickly you chop down a tree. Whereas with Slayer, once tier 80 armor comes out and T90 armor comes out, Slayer just gets quicker just because there's new armor, and then EOC comes out and Slayer gets ridiculously quicker because there's abilities that just tear through monsters like paper.
Yep. Yeah, AoE has really changed the game for sure. Okay, so next section is kind of maximizing DPS. Basically you want to figure out what your target is immune to. So if it's a kind of somewhat older boss, like say Vorago, or even God Wars Dungeon, it'll often be immune to almost everything. So almost every boss in the game is stun immune, and many of the bosses in the game, even if they can be stun, will clear the stun almost instantly. Many bosses in the game will almost instantly clear debuffs. But those are all nuances to pay attention to. The counterexample is, of course, Telos, where stunning is a huge part of your ability rotation. But in Slayer, for most non-elite mobs, stun combinations, especially if you are doing single target damage, help a lot. Essentially, the 3-second abilities Rack, Piercing Shot, Slice, and Punish were updated so that if the target is stunned, they do approximately double damage. They become as good as a very powerful basic instead of a weak basic. So one way to improve your DPS a lot is to, anytime you use a stun and your stun successfully hits the target, to immediately use one of those 3-second abilities in order to maximize the amount of damage, because then it's as if you had an extra cleave or an extra dragon breath that you added to your rotation, which really helps out a lot. Harley, I don't know how much you've used stun combinations. Do you attempt to do that when you're doing Slayer, or do you focus to that extent, or how do you deal with that? Because I know your favorite bosses, Vindicta and Araxor stuns, of course, are not. Well, yeah. I mean, they're allowed, but
I mean, I don't know if this qualifies in the same level we're talking about here, but the main place I've done it is like air roots.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, when I was going for 99, I was like between 100 and like 110 combats, so like they were still giant assholes to defeat, so I had to use stuns there to even beat them like 1v1 without getting my ass kicked.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I haven't really done it until Scape got removed from them. But if you want to do Erits, they're reasonably good XP and really excellent money, especially for mid-tier players. Now the way to do it, as far as I know, is to use single-target Drygores, or if you have the Tier 85 God Wars Dungeon 2 weapons, use those. Really, because accuracy is so important at Erits, that I'd use those over a different weapon. And yeah, stun combinations could really help a lot in damage. I didn't think about that, because when I did Erits, you just chewed through them with a scythe, and I never really worried about stunning. Yeah, so the next one is Bleeds. It doubles anytime you use the Combust ability or Fragmentation Shot ability. If you make the target move, it doubles the amount of damage it deals. So if you're doing a Slayer task and you're fighting targets that are spawn far away from you but will move towards you, it's often good to tag them with a bleed, because as they're walking over to you, sometimes they'll literally die just from the bleed damage. When you're doing bossing, this is tremendously helpful, especially at Araxor if you're using magic or ranged on phase 1. And even the other phases, but really it shines on phase 1 if you're having trouble killing it, getting it below 5k before the web burns down, which I know not everybody, from what I understand, can do that so easily.
Not me, that's for sure.
Okay, yeah. So one way to help you do that is to use one of those bleeds and walk underneath Araxor, so Araxor moves, and essentially you've doubled the amount of damage you're dealing. And really, little things like that can go a long way, because eventually you really want to be trying to get Araxor below 5k before the web burns down. To give you an example of what Switchscape would be like, when I use melee and I'm using both invention switches and pre-invention switches, so Drygores to Scythe, I typically get Araxor below 5k around but sometime between when the web is a third and a half burned down. And so that way, usually it's about a half, and that way I could use Natural Instinct straight into the next phase and Zerk right away. Because basically half of the remainder of phase 1, I'm just kind of hanging around using defensives here and there, just using basics to camp 100 Adren. But yeah, stuff like that will help you a lot to get faster kill times. Next thing is auto attacks. This is pretty easily explained in one of Evil Lucario's videos, but essentially the theory is that abilities work on a tick-based system, not on a second-based system. So even though the global cooldown is theoretically 3 seconds for all abilities, for defensive abilities that's not the case. So things like Freedom, Anticipate, Debilitate, Devotion, Barricade, Reflect, Resonance, all of those you could be using on almost any boss. While it might seem like once you use Anticipate, you can't immediately use an ability cooldown, auto attacks have no such global cooldown. They aren't part of the global cooldown. They simply go as fast as your weapon is able to cast. And so after you use, say, Anticipated or Exor, you can click on your, especially this is easiest with Magic because you can simply keybind the spell that you're using and click on that. But oftentimes you get in an auto attack with that defensive. This also works with ultimate abilities. So when you Sunshine, your say you use Sunshine, Dragon Breath is still on cooldown, but you can still get in an auto attack if it's with a staff, or 2 auto attacks if you're using a wand and an offhand. We call those lossless auto attacks. And while auto attacks aren't quote unquote good, it is better to obviously use an auto attack than to simply wait and do nothing. So an example would be anticipate wait. You can either anticipate wait cleave or you can anticipate auto attack cleave. And when you're inside of a Zerk, the auto attack with a scythe can do up to 7k damage with when you're Zerked. So that could be really a ton of extra DPS if you're using your auto attacks correctly and using them losslessly. The last thing is you can't gain adrenaline on a target until it's already been tagged. So because of how fast auto attacks are, when you're when you're tagging a boss for the first time and you're about to use an ultimate or you're going to attack it or whatever, it's far better to tag the boss and then use something like Dragon Breath or Cleave or Needle Strike or whatever your first basic is in your rotation than to simply start off with a basic, because that's 8% adrenaline, an extra 3% if you're using range or melee auto attacks, or 2% if you're using magic auto attacks. So that's between 10% and 14% based on impatient procs of adrenaline that you are sacrificing by tagging a boss with an ability rather than an auto attack. And even though the ability will do more damage, the 10 to 14% extra adrenaline is just flat out better than the very slight improvement in the ability versus the auto attack. So if that seems complicated, it sort of is, but once you get the tick system down pretty well, you find yourself sneaking in auto attacks almost constantly, which can make a gigantic improvement, especially if you're trying to learn things like Trio Vorago or Duo Vorago. Use of lossless auto attacks on phase 5 can mean the difference between getting an easy 1 to 2 push kill and failing, believe it or not. So Harley, I'm wondering, have you how have you been trying to incorporate this? Are you trying to incorporate this? Obviously, this is somewhat difficult to do on Revolution because usually Revolution will just automatically cast your first ability. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's really hard using auto attack. This is why Magic helps, because with Magic you could just keybind whatever your spell is, and then you hit that keybind. But even that sometimes is a little funky with Revolution, which is why I don't recommend it for higher level bossing.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've heard talked about, but I've never heard like the exact reasoning to do it as your first attack. And no, it's not something I have incorporated yet because I am still on Revolution. It's a goal of mine to learn full manual at some point, but I haven't been doing a ton of bossing recently, so I haven't been motivated to do that yet. But this is definitely a lot of learning for me as to knowing, at least using auto attacks in the beginning of a rotation just to build that extra 8%. That actually does sound super useful because, yeah, that's a lot of adrenaline to miss out on.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about it, if you're using your Switch and you're using an ultimate, then if you use your ultimate ability tag, then use an ability, you're already at a minimum of 22 or 23 adrenaline, even if you don't get any impatient procs, versus being at 10 adrenaline or even 18 adrenaline. It still is a really big difference because functionally you're one basic away plus an adren pot, and you're already using a threshold as your third ability inside of your sun rotation, which is how I'm able to get 2 wild magics to asphyx 2 deep impact and the tendrils inside of Sunshine, whereas other people, and that's really the biggest difference in DPS, is all your DPS in RS basically comes from maximizing thresholds inside of your ultimate abilities, and if you're able to do that, then that's the core of all DPS. Everything else, all these perks, all these switches, all the stuff outside of that, those are just kind of icing. The order of your ability, stun combos, whatever, all those are nice, but maximizing thresholds inside of your damage boosting ultimates and using damage boosting ultimates as often and as quickly as possible is how to improve DPS the best. Yeah, so next thing I have here is debuffs versus ancient magics. So magic, the magic.
Wait,
magic
weren't we just talking about auto attacks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have special attacks listed? I guess.
Oh yeah, I have special attacks next. I guess
Yeah, thought my brain maybe missed you talking about that for a second, but I figured I'd bring it up in case it didn't.
Yeah, so special attacks are still really good in RS3. Not Dragon Claws, but basically special attacks that change affinity. So the Gothic Staff for magic and the Statius Warhammer for melee. This is another part of the reason why ranged is kind of left way outside in terms of the best combat styles to be using. It's part of why ranged is so much less popular, is unless you're using Chinchampas, really there's no advantage to it, and part of that is because there's no ranged special attack that changes the affinity of your target. And affinity, and we'll talk about this much more in next week's show, affinity drastically changes your ability to use accuracy or to improve your accuracy and damage.
Well, 2 weeks from now.
Yeah. In the 2 weeks from now, in the next show, yeah, is what I meant. Other special attacks aren't super worth using. There's some experimentation that's always being done with the Vesta's Longsword special. There's lots of experiments being done with what we could use the Green Beam at Telos Phase 5 for in terms of special attacks, but really the ones to be using on an everyday basis, and they're very worth doing, especially if you have to do a lot of damage, is Gothic Staff and Statius Warhammer.
Awesome. I didn't really know that special attacks still held a super relevant place in the game. That's good to know.
Oh yeah, there's no place where I'm using magic where I don't bring a Gothic Staff with me, and Gothic Staff is a huge part of every rotation that I do at any high level boss. That one in particular is really fantastic, and it actually does a lot of damage too. It's not infrequent to hit 7, 8, 9K with a Gothic Staff inside of a Sunshine. Yeah, so next thing is debuffs and ancient magics. So really the main debuff to focus on is vulnerability. It just, for a full minute, it improves, it adds 10% flat 10% on to whatever damage you're doing. This is extremely useful at any group bosses because it affects all of your teammates as well. And here's one way to think about it. So if you're doing, say, Yakamaru and Pool has 1 million life points, simply casting vulnerability, that one spell, that one cast of vulnerability is functionally doing 100,000 damage over the course of a minute. And given that a really phenomenal DPS rotation will yield something like 120k damage over a minute, simply having somebody use vulnerability is just hugely beneficial for the team because it just simply, it's almost like removing 10% of something's life points. So it's often used at Scopulus on Vorago. It's used on Vorago Phase 5. It's used at AOD all the time. It's used at Telos. A lot of bosses will clear debuffs almost immediately, but Phase 5 Vorago, AOD, Telos, there are definitely enough exceptions where you should definitely consider using vulnerability. Most of the speed kills that you see for something like Nex or Queen Black Dragon, a lot of times people will use ranged in order to get those kills, but they'll bring a magic switch just to use vulnerability at the beginning, just because of how overpowered it is, to be honest. And there's some other debuffs, but those ones are purely for reducing the amount of damage dealt to you. They don't affect pushback at Vorago and unless your team isn't super experienced, just not really worth using at all. And in my opinion, not worth the inventory slots for the runes. Ancient Magiks. Really, the main thing here is they also have debuffs. So if you're learning how to bomb tank or base tank Yakimaru, a lot of people will use the smoke or spells in order to debuff how much damage is being dealt to you, and or blood spells to heal yourself. These only work with auto attacks unless you have the prayer activated, in which case it can work a bit with abilities. If you're doing that, especially if you're doing, say, like high enraged Telos and are bringing Yak, you have enough food, just bring extra restore pots, and that'll heal you up nicely throughout the kill. Ice spells are the other example at bosses that are not anti-stun. Being able to use ice spells in order to stun lock bosses for a longer period of time is extremely good. The last one I'll point to is Ruby Aurora. If you're doing a group boss and you're standing near a lot of people, you can use Ruby Aurora in order to increase damage by 1% per stack. Obviously, vulnerability is far superior to any of these. So if you're not using Intercept, then pretty much you should almost always be using normal Spellbook. The only exception to this is High Enraged Telos, where you can't pre-font or one-font Phase 5, where freezing minions is really good. So yeah, that's the kind of Ancient Magiks versus normal Magiks. The last thing is Ancient Magiks do double damage on Muzpa, so it's worth switching for that. The last thing here is the Lunar Spellbook. This is popular at group bosses like Yakimaru and AOD because you could use Group Vengeance. It's simply a nice debuff. If you're using ranged or melee, you might as well bring Lunar Spellbook, both because you can use Disruption Shield before a hit that's going to hit you for a lot of damage. This is good for basing with melee. Really good for basing with melee, actually, especially while using Berserk. And then Group Vengeance is it's not a huge improvement in DPS, but there's really no reason not to do it. And a boss like AOD, especially in Zaro's phase, Group Vengeance can be really, really nice as a basically free increase to damage if you're using ranged. Okay, yeah, so I don't know, do you have other tips or suggestions, Harley, on the maximizing DPS section?
Not really that I can think of. I mean, I guess I would say, start off slow. If you are someone who is just doing full revolution right now, just auto casting abilities, make sure you have those abilities in the right order. Like, we didn't go through specific rotations in this episode because we feel like that's kind of a little bit in the weeds for what we're covering, and also there's people out there who already did a fantastic job at that. People like Junesongs, who we talked about, who has a great guide on exact rotations to use for your action bars and stuff like that. So make sure that you have them in the right order. You don't want to organize abilities by whichever one's off cooldown first. You always have it be used. You want to have them organized. Well, you want to either cast them if you're using full manual, or have them organized if you're using Revolution in such a way that the highest DPS ones are always going off as quickly as they can. It's just something that you may not realize at first. I know it took me probably a year to learn that, and as soon as I made that switch, my DPS went skyrocketing through the roof. So make sure to take that into account. And if you don't have if you're doing all that stuff and you don't have your keybinds set up, go there. Don't we give out a lot of info on this show. Don't feel like you've got to try to do every single part of it at once. Someone like me, when I first started PVMing with David, my action bars were not organized properly. I had the quickest off cooldown stuff first, and I'd had my keybinds set to 1 through plus, and I wasn't doing a bunch of stuff that I should have been. I was wearing tank armor instead of power armor, all this stuff. So take your time. It's going to take you a long time to learn this stuff. Don't feel like you've got to rush and start doing everything we mentioned right at once, because even a lot of the stuff David mentioned I have not yet implemented. It's on my long-term list to do a lot of this stuff, but it's a lot of learning, so don't feel like you've got to cram for a test or something.
Yeah, exactly. what I try to do is I try to add one switch at a time or one thing at a time to my rotation. So that's kind of how I ended up teaching myself all these things. Is I never added more than one, maybe two additional things at a time for me to learn.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's where I've started too. I've only recently started switching, and the first switch I've done, like I said, is the ability to use defensive, so switching to a shield so that I can protect. And then the next thing I've been working on is also doing a ring switch, so that
Yeah,
because that's actually a change that I made very recently. Is I didn't realize, like, I used to always wear whatever the ring from that quest is, Asylum
Asylum
Surgeons.
Surgeon's ring. Yeah.
Yeah. And now I always wear Vigor unless I'm switching. Then I'll bring the Asylum Surgeon's ring with me. But
Yep.
there's always something, I guess I would say, new to learn.
Yeah, and I would say if the only two weapon type switches you bring are Planted Feet and a Ring of Vigor and the ring switch, if those are the only two switches you ever use, that alone is the bulk of how to improve your damage when using magic or ranged. Really, those two are the key to everything because, as I've said a lot of times on the show, the core to all DPS rotations are uh, using as many thresholds as possible inside of Sunshine and Death Swiftness. That is the core to everything, and everything else is built on that skeleton. The last thing I would add is these debuffs, like vulnerability, do not work well at all with Revolution. Even if you have it keybound, unless your debuff is the very first thing in your Revolution bar, it is impossible for you to cast it. Even if it is the first thing in your Revolution bar, it's still very difficult to cast it. I have my friend who is insistent on always using Revolution literally will turn off Revolution, cast a debuff, and then turn Revolution back on because that's how literally unusable it. And so it's another that when I say full manual is good because of its flexibility, that's one of the reasons why is it allows you to do things like debuff easily.
I feel like that's also, something worth saying in general too when it comes to Revolution is I think a lot of people's, including my own, sometimes annoyance with the tick system or what we think is the combat system in RuneScape can be Revolution and the global cooldown kind of screwing with you. So
Yeah,
you try to like freedom at racks when you can't freedom because the global cooldown is going, and then you get cleaved and you're like, why the hell didn't freedom cast? And it's because you don't have full control over your abilities. So like if you're one of those people who really kind of hates the way combat feels, it's worth taking a look at if Revolution is part of that, because going full manual will, no abilities are being cast unless you specifically cast it, which makes it way easier to do stuff like freedom or surge or, anything that you basically to use. Otherwise, you basically have to beat Revolution to the punch to use them. So
yeah.
keep that in
Even
mind.
at something like the new Gemstone Dragons, I kind of figured out what people meant by it's hard to avoid is that I tried it with Revolution and with full manual. On Revolution, sometimes as you should be dodging, your character will Revolution will cast an ability for you, which doesn't allow you to dodge sometimes, or doesn't allow you to surge or whatever. Whereas with full manual, you obviously never have that problem. And so something like Cleave at Araxor is a perfect example, or Web at Araxor. There's a lot of times Revolution will automatically cast, like, say, Cleave for you, and you'll have a web up and you'll kill yourself to a cleave. Whereas if you were on full manual, you never have that problem because you would never automatically cast cleave. You only cast cleave when you want to cast cleave.
Yeah.
So really, the tick system, and you have to remember, Revolution was an add-on to EOC. It was never part of EOC. It was never considered in the planning of EOC. Nobody ever thought it would be a thing. It happened like almost a year later, right, Harley? At least like several months later. I think it was almost a year later that
Yeah,
Revolution
you
came
know the
out.
timeline better than
And
me because I
so,
wasn't playing.
yeah, so the developers of EOC did not plan for Revolution to ever be a thing. And so I think that you would be surprised how seamless combat becomes once you've mastered full manual because everything is based on the same tick system instead of some things based on instead of the global cooldown and tick system always being kind of not in sync. So yeah, I totally agree with that. If the combat system feels clunky to you and you're using Revolution, Revolution is almost certainly a huge part of why you think it's clunky.
Yeah. So that's a big thing. You can take the time to learn. Of course, you can still keep doing it as stuff like Slayer or whatever God Wars 1, but learning it at a higher level for at least Slayer monsters, things like that, it's definitely worth doing. I think it makes the combat system feel much more responsive because it's literally making it more responsive because you aren't, Revolution literally automates half of it, which is cool, except when you want to do something specific right now and you can't because Revolution decided to cast whatever it decided to cast. So, yeah, keep that in mind. And yeah, do you have anything else to add, David?
Not specifically to that. But yeah, I would say really everything becomes more seamless when you.
Yeah, I just mean we are
definitely true.
Nearing the end of the show, so if you don't have anything to add,
I would say we still wanted to add prayers, right?
Oh,
we're
right.
going to talk about
prayer
switching.
I didn't scroll down the document far enough. Yeah.
Yeah, so prayer switching, this can be helpful at Slayer. Living Wyverns is one example where it'll attack you with both magic and ranged. Prayer flicking between magic and range can allow you to significantly reduce damage. Reducing damage obviously allows you to do much more DPS. Places like Phase 4 Araxor, bomb tanking or base tanking Vorago, Angel of Death, etc. Really any high-level PVM situation, really anything God Wars Dungeon 2 and up, I would say prayer switching factors in. I don't know if that's your experience, Harley, but that's kind of where I'm at. Because QBD, you can kind of just camp Soul Split the whole time, but I think God Wars Dungeon 2, there's a big improvement if you prayer flick. I don't know.
I think it depends.
That's kind of the.
It depends who you're fighting. If you're trying to go like completely without food, right? Like I've gotten to the point where I don't have to prayer flick to like camp Vindicta, but I do bring sharks with me, and I still need a yak sometimes for it. But I'm almost gotten to the point now where I don't even need that. So I think. It probably at Hellweir it would definitely be needed, but like Vindicta, you can get to a place where you don't need it if you're just using defensive abilities and such. But yeah,
definitely
it depends specifically which boss you're doing there, but it helps a ton to be flicking for sure.
My finding at Vindicta is, and I use a Titan there, is that if I'm using Essence or a Zerk Aura or both, and I'm just doing like YOLO Zerk as often as possible. Prayer flicking is the difference between me having to eat food and not eat food. And prayer flicking basically occurs in two ways. One is prayer flicking between different defensive overheads. The other is prayer flicking between a defensive overhead and soul split. Prayer flicking for soul split is one of the best ways to improve your DPS. And the reason why is that anytime you're eating food, except maybe when you're drinking Guthix Restore potions, you're either lowering your stats or you're lowering your adrenaline. So anytime you eat, you're always losing DPS. Eating is always bad for DPS, unless there's some exceptions, and we can talk about this in another show. But as a rule, it's always bad to eat if you want to improve your DPS. And so being able to soul split flick, even if all you do is flick to soul split for thresholds like Hurricane, Assault, Destroy, Wild Magic, etc., can really help tremendously. Combined with an Amulet of Souls, that can really, it's like using wild soul splitting, or soul split flicking, I invented a new word there. Soul split flicking for, like, say, your wild magic is almost as good as eating like a swordfish or a monkfish every time you do that, or something like that. So it's as if you're constantly brewing yourself up.
Yeah.
The way it works is that soul split registers right before the ability is cast. So the order is switch to soul split, cast wild magic, immediately switch back to melee mage, whatever it is. Unless, of course, you could keep soul split up, then keep soul split up, that's fine. But basically, protection prayers block as long as they're up the tick before your hit. Soul split activates its effect as long as it's up the tick before you cast your ability. and that's part of, again, why being full manual can be so beneficial, is that you have just so much more control. Even if you are on Revolution, though, you obviously have much more control over when you're casting your thresholds. So even if you only practice switching to Soul Split for those threshold abilities, you could really improve your healing a lot. The best place to practice this, and I know this isn't for everyone, but learning how to bomb tank Vorago is the best way for you to learn how to, in my opinion, the best way for me to learn how to Soul Split Flick. And the best way to learn how to Prayer Flick is to do a Raxor, because on phase 4, especially if you're using close range, but even if you're using ranged or magic, you're switching between Prey Mage and Prey Range pretty often. If you're using melee, even more so. So those are the two bosses I think are the best for practicing that.
I found Rax a great place to learn Soul Split Flicking as well, because it's super helpful there to try to lessen the amount of food you're eating, and also it's you with how much damage she puts out, you of course need to have your protection prayers up most of the time, but being able to flick the Soul Split just to heal when you are ulting is I found it super helpful there. That's something I recently implemented.
Another tip when minions are out, if you're about to use Hurricane and they're a bunch of you, if you Soul Split Flick before you Hurricane, you heal all of the damage that you deal to the minions with Soul Split as well. If you're using Chinchampas and you targeting multiple things, let's say Edemu. So Edemu, I use Chins at, and oftentimes I'll be like, say, 800, 900 HP because I'll just be getting rinsed. I'll switch to Soul Split, and then I'll use Snapshot, and I'll Soul Split the HP off of 9 different snapshots, and I'm back up to almost full HP just off that one Soul Split flick. So really all kinds of stuff like that is really, really helpful. The last little thing, and this is a little more nuanced, or this is a little more niche, if you do not have the Tier 99 prayer unlocked and are still relying on the old Tier 95 prayers, if you're relying on hitting Debilitate, so this would be most likely Vorago or Telos are the two examples of this. If you switch to Fortitude, it's approximately 2% better chance of hitting your Debilitate. And sometimes that could save your life. It can either save a kill if you're doing Vorago and are learning. Trust me, once you master it, Duo and Trio, Vorago becomes easy, even if you never even hit a single debil. But of course, when you're learning Duo or Trio, that debil can make the difference between a kill and not a kill. And at Telos, it can make the difference between surviving a so much power or dying to a so much power. So that extra 2% can help you a little bit. And it's easier to just buy the Tier 99 prayer, of course, but not everyone has the luxury of being able to afford this.
It's easier to buy a 750 mil prayer,
Well, it is expensive for sure, but
yeah, I'm saying time investment wise, it's probably easier to do the flick than to spend the money.
Oh sure. Fair. But I mean, the prayers are awesome. You should for sure as soon as you can afford them. Get them before you buy Tier 92s. They're phenomenal. But yeah.
Or just go back in time I want prayers. I want they were adjusted.
Yeah, well, I bought one. I bought one of my 3 prayers the day after the adjustment was announced. So they climbed from like 120 mil each to I bought mine for I think 350 mil. And then the other 2 I bought at 730 mil each.
I would have made so much money off that update if I would have had bills, because I wanted to invest in those so bad. It's not just one of those things. I know someone
who put 3 max cash offers in the GE for prayers at 200 mil each. So that was he bought something like 20 of them for 200 mil each and sold them all for 650.
Yep, I would have loved to have done that, but I did not have the money, or else I would have.
Yeah, and it was pretty predictable that they were changing. I mean, they were extremely, extremely niche in terms of their utility without the way that they were. So
yeah, it was clear they were going to
get an update. Pretty obvious they were going to get.
It was disappointing that they didn't come up with a more creative update, but whatever.
Yeah, I think that was the expected one, and now it's good because they shouldn't, without that update, AOD would be not worth doing except for massing for the pet, just because just not enough GP per hour to be worth the effort. And so that it's pretty necessary that it was pretty good that they did that to make sure their brand new group boss didn't become dead content for smaller teams within a week and a half.
All right. Well, I think that is about to wrap it up, unless you have something that you would like to add.
No, I think that's pretty good. That's a good set of stuff. There's some definitely really exciting stuff up ahead for the next show. There's some math stuff that I'm pretty excited about that I'm trying to figure out how to present in a way. I will say that if any listeners have ideas or suggestions for how to present like just straight up math in a way that could be fun to listen to, I would love to hear a suggestion, either on Discord or in game or PM Harley or MageBit or whatever. I think that'd be good, because I think it's going to be fine as of now, but for some people it might not be super fun to listen to math. But if you have an idea, that'd be great.
Next week's show, we're going to be going now I'm saying next week. Got me all messed up. The next show, we are going to be talking all about auras, pocket slot items, and familiars. And of course, along with that is going to come affinity and hit chance, which is kind of the thing that all PVM and RuneScape is built on from the dawn of time. So I think that'll be a fascinating show. If you've never kind of deep dived into that stuff, we will be covering it like David was saying, on a very deep level. Getting mathematical. It'll still be interesting if you're not like a super math nerd, because I am not. But these systems are fascinating nonetheless, even if you aren't some math whiz. So yeah, that will be coming up in 2 weeks. Also, please remember that this show, Season 1, is coming to you as kind of a test here. We are trying to fund the rest, the future of the show, basically, and potentially doing it weekly, if that is something you are interested in. If you are really enjoying the show, you can go to tip.runeweek.com and give us a donation. We are $10 away from me streaming a quest for you all. I am also thinking about adding a new reward near the end that I kind of just recently thought of, so stay tuned and you may hear an announcement about that on the main feed. Thank you very much to everybody who has already donated, and if you're able to, please go ahead and donate. You can reach me in game at Harley Q Win. That's the letter Q and WIN win. And David, where can people reach you in game?
In game, my current username is DX space Deeps. So DEEPS.
How did I know that you would have changed it? Of course you did.
Yeah, a lot of my friends in the service that I sell leeches in, we've all changed their name to DX. It's kind of funny.
That's kind of a tribute to DX the LB. I'm sure he'll be thrilled that you all did that.
Yeah, totally a DX the LB tribute, and not a tribute to D Generation X, the WWE club. Definitely a DX the LB tribute.
Not at all. I mean, there's only one famous RuneScape player with DX in the name, and that's DX Thelb. So
yeah, DX Thelb, exactly.
DX Thelb, the pro PVMer who only PVMs in Dragon. He's gotten 2K enraged Telos kills wearing full Dragon. It's pretty amazing to watch. Check it out. Check out his YouTube.
Funny enough, MageBit PM'd me and thought originally that I was DX, and asked me if I had started becoming a PVMer because of the Deeps name in the title, which I thought was funny.
That is funny. I had to add a note to you that says your original name, because if I ever come back to the game in 5 years after I quit or something like that, I'm gonna have no idea who you are. Your name's gonna be like QZ49 or something, and no idea. So I have entry tank in there, so I actually freaking remember who you are.
Yeah, definitely. I probably changed my name too much. That is weird.
You do. You definitely do. It's you pretty much change your name as often as someone can. Anyways, that is gonna wrap up the show for today. Thank you all very much for listening. if you want to submit any feedback, please go ahead and do that. Like I said on the last show, if we get enough feedback, we will do a listener feedback specific episode. Also, if you have topic suggestions, you can also submit those. We're willing to listen to them, and if we missed anything, let us know. We can always cover that in the next show. And have a week, everybody.